Michael Reynolds sat in seat one his shoulders turned just enough to shield him from the fluorescent hush of the cabin. When the question took root, not the kind people say out loud, but the kind that grips the back of your throat and refuses to let go. Asterisk, what happens when no one hears the sound that should never be ignored? It wasn't turbulence, or the soft click of seatbelts, or the recycled air pressing heavy against his chest. It was the crying. A baby, somewhere behind row 20, had been wailing in a tone that cut deeper than irritation. It wasn't hunger, it wasn't exhaustion. It was the kind of cry that makes adults shift in their seats, because it carries a warning and alarm older than language itself. But the crew, neat in their Navy uniforms, moved down the aisle with that calm indifference trained into them, smiles fixed, hands steady, eyes pretending not to notice. They offered sodas, checked bags, ignored the sound, and in that silence was something almost violent. A refusal to acknowledge what every passenger felt, but no one dared to name. You, sitting here with me, know what that silence means? You've felt it before when a room goes still because someone knows the truth, but keeps it buried. You've felt it when people look away from a shadow that lingers too long on the wall. This isn't about a baby crying. It never was. It's about what the sound dragged into the cabin, a weight no one wanted to touch. Michael shifted, his eyes narrowing on the overhead bin, his pulse flicking in his neck, because he recognized something in that cry, something he wasn't supposed to recognize. He leaned forward, hands pressing against his knees, not sure if he wanted to stand, not sure if he could, and then it happened. Medial, a man no one had paid attention to before, quiet, average, the kind of face you forget, rose slowly, almost unwillingly, as if pulled by something heavier than choice. He didn't look at the crying baby. He didn't look at the flight crew. His gaze cut through the cabin, locking with Michael's for one unbearable second. And in that moment, the plane no longer felt like a place of travel, but like a sealed chamber, where something hidden was about to be forced into the open. The man's hand slipped into his jacket pocket. No one moved. No one breathed. When he pulled it free, there was no weapon, no threat, just a badge glinting under the dim cabin lights, held up not to the crew, not to the passengers, but to Michael. And before Michael could even process what he was seeing, before the words could form in his mouth, the baby stopped crying abruptly, unnaturally, like a switch had been thrown. In that silence, the man leaned closer to Michael's row, lips barely parting, whispering a name no one else seemed to hear. A name Michael hadn't heard since the funeral. The man's badge lowered, the flight attendant still smiling as if nothing had happened. And Michael realized with a sick drop in his gut that everyone around him had already forgotten the crying had ever existed. Everyone but him. Everyone but the man. It's the name now echoing in his head. Impossible. Forbidden. Alive. Michael turned to demand an answer, but the seat beside him was empty. The quiet man was gone. Do you want me to carry this scene into the next 30 seconds? Where the audience begins to question if Michael imagined it, or if the entire flight is hiding something far worse? Michael turned to demand an answer, but the seat beside him was empty. The quiet man was gone. Michael turned to demand an answer, but the seat beside him was empty. The quiet man was gone. For a heartbeat, it was as if he'd never been there at all. No impression in the cushion, no shuffle of footsteps down the aisle, just a hollow, buzzing silence that pressed into Michael's ears like static, like when an old TV goes black and you swear you hear voices underneath the noise. He blinked hard, leaned back, tried to catch his breath. His chest felt tight, as though the cabin air had thinned without anyone noticing. He reached for the call button but stopped halfway. The attendants were still moving calmly, pouring sodas, smiling too easily, their eyes skipping right past him like he wasn't there. But the badge, she'd seen it, hadn't he? The name, that name that didn't belong here, not on a flight full of strangers. His throat ached with it, but when he tried to mouth the syllables, they slipped from memory. Like waking from a dream you swear you write down, but can recall by the time your pen touches paper. He checked his phone. Black screen. Dead battery. He swore it had been at 70% when he boarded. Then something stranger. The crying. He leaned into the aisle, craning his neck toward the back rows. Mothers with toddlers. Men scrolling phones. A girl reading a paperback with her knees drawn tight, but no baby. Not one. His pulse spiked. He unbuckled, stood halfway before a hand clamped lightly on his shoulder. "Careful," a voice said, warm and measured, like it knew too much. "You'll draw attention you don't want." Michael turned. A woman sat by the window, long dark hair pulled over her shoulder, hands folded neatly in her lap. He could have sworn the seat had been empty since boarding, but now she was there composed, unsmiling. Her gaze cutting into him with the weight of someone who had been watching far longer than he realized. "Did you see him?" Michael whispered. She tilted her head. "See who?" "The man, the badge he was." He stopped, because he wasn't sure anymore if he had seen him. His mind replayed the moment, but flickered like a scratched tape. The man rising the badge, glinting the whisper of a name, then the memory distorted, as if someone had pressed fast forward and rewind over the same few seconds until nothing stayed in place. The woman leaned closer, her perfume faint, almost medicinal. "People don't disappear, Michael. Not unless they were never there. How do you know my name?" The question shot out sharper than he intended, his voice cracking just enough for the passenger across the aisle to glance, frown, then look away as if embarrassed to witness something private. Her lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Because you've forgotten me before." Michael recoiled. His first thought was a tricksome, elaborate scam, someone preying on his mind. Duh. But beneath her words was a tug, faint but real, like the feeling of déjà vu you can't shake. He searched her face, looking for recognition. There was nothing, no memory. Yet his chest tightened in the same way it had the day he stood at his sister's grave, unable to reconcile the stone with the face in his mind. He swallowed hard. "I don't know you." "You've said that every time," the way she said it. Soft, tired, certain made his stomach flip. And then came the sound. A faint crackle, like radio interference, humming at the edges of his hearing. He looked around. No one else reacted. It grew sharper, louder, until he realized it was leaking from the seatback screen in front of him, though the monitor was off. He pressed the corner with his thumb. Nothing. Just black glass. But through it came a whisper, muffled, grainy, distorted like an old voicemail, his own voice, speaking words he didn't remember saying. "I saw him," the recording hissed. "I saw him, and he knew about the door." Michael's breath caught. The woman beside him didn't flinch. She only turned her head toward the screen as though she had been waiting for this moment. "What door?" Michael asked, his throat dry. Her silence was its own answer. The hum in the speakers faded. The passengers sat unmoved, oblivious, sipping sodas, reading magazines. Caught in a loop of normalcy so clean, it made Michael's skin crawl. He pressed his palms to his eyes, trying to steady himself. Was this psychosis? Sleep deprivation? He remembered his doctor warning him last year after the accident that stress could distort memory, cause hallucinations. But this wasn't stress. This wasn't his mind bending. He felt the raw weight of it in his bones, the difference between something imagined and something real. The woman finally spoke, low enough only he could hear. "They won't acknowledge it. They never do. That's how you'll know what's real." Michael pulled his hands down, his voice shaking. "Why me?"
Her eyes softened, though her expression remained unreadable. "Because you remember pieces you were never supposed to." For the first time, he realized the tears pricking his eyes weren't fear, they were grief. Heavy, unspoken grief that had stalked him for years. He tried to speak the name again, the one whispered to him by the man with the badge, but the syllables stuck in his throat, slippery, refusing form. His chest constricted. He thought of his mother, her voice calling him inside that summer day he tried to forget. He thought of the locked red door in the basement of his childhood home, the one his father swore never existed. And then the lights in the cabin flickered, just once, long enough to make passengers mutter. In that blink, Michael saw them differently. The woman beside him frozen mid-turn, the flight attendant's smile stretched to wide, the passenger's eyes glassy, vacant, as if puppeteered. When the lights steadied, everything was normal again. Too normal. Michael's hand shook as he reached for the overhead light. He needed something tangible, something he could control. The switch clicked, but nothing happened. Instead, a voice hissed faintly through the intercom, low, broken, a child's voice. "Don't look at the window." Every muscle in Michael's body locked. He couldn't stop himself. He looked, and what he saw was not sky, not clouds, not the curve of the horizon. The window reflected the inside of the cabin, but not as it was. Not now. The reflection showed him alone, every other seat empty. Michael gasped, pressing back into his chair, eyes darting between the window and the real cabin filled with passengers who acted as if nothing was wrong. The woman was watching him, her face calm, though something in her eyes flickered, something almost pleading. "Michael," she whispered, "you have to choose which version you believe, because once you do, the other one disappears." His heart hammered, sweat gathering at his temple. "I don't understand." "You're not supposed to." Her voice cracked for the first time, the mask slipping. "But you've come further than before. That's why they'll try harder now." "Who?" Michael demanded. She leaned close, so close he felt her breath against his ear. "The people who keep asking you the same question every time you forget." "What question?" But before she could answer, the overhead speakers roared to life, drowning everything in a shrill static that made the passengers wince and cover their ears. And under the static, layered so deep he thought he imagined it, came that same child's voice again. "Michael, this is the last time." The noise cut abruptly, leaving the cabin eerily silent. The woman's seat was empty again, and Michael realized, with a trembling certainty that hollowed him out, that the real mystery wasn't who had vanished but why he kept forgetting every time it happened. Michael had convinced himself, for a few hours, that he finally understood. It was easier that way. Easier to believe the strange events on the flight were fragments of his own mind stress fractures, the weight of trauma splintering into hallucination. The badge, the crying baby, the whispers in the cabin, all of it had a plausible thread if he pulled it hard enough. He had seen faces where there were none before. He had heard words from a mind still clawing through grief. He told himself it was a trick of oxygen levels, of a tired brain replaying childhood shadows, and when the plane touched down and the world outside was the same familiar sprawl of tarmac and blinking towers of light, he felt a swell of relief so profound it almost brought him to his knees. He moved with the crowd through the jet bridge, his bag slung over his shoulder, rehearsing how he would tell the story later as if it were a bad dream. He would laugh, downplay it, maybe admit he hadn't slept in days. Already the harsh reality of airport announcements and the shuffle of rolling suitcases made the memory feel flimsy, like smoke dissolving in daylight. He told himself the worst was over. He told himself the nightmare had ended once he stepped off the plane. But the lie cracked quickly. The first fracture came in the terminal restroom. He leaned over the sink, splashing water on his face, when the mirror glitched just for a second, barely long enough to name. The reflection didn't move with him. He turned his head. The man in the glass stayed staring forward, a still photograph wearing his own tired eyes. It corrected itself instantly, so fast he almost dismissed it. But deep inside, a cold knowledge surfaced. This wasn't the first time the mirror had betrayed him. He felt the recognition like a bruise pressed too hard, like a memory glitch that wasn't new at all, only buried. He staggered back, gripping the sink, and then he remembered, years ago when he was 10, standing in his parents' hallway at night, he had seen himself in the mirror by the front door, but the reflection hadn't matched. It had smiled at him. He had screamed, his mother rushing out of the kitchen, swearing he'd been dreaming. Later, when he pressed her about it, she told him gently, almost too quickly, "You're not crazy, they lied to you." He hadn't understood what she meant. He still didn't. But hearing her voice now, echoing across decades, he knew she had seen it too. He forced himself out of the restroom, back into the crowd. He told himself he was fine. He told himself there had to be an explanation. That's when he saw Hertha woman from the flight, sitting calmly on one of the waiting benches, a carry-on bag at her feet, flipping through a magazine that seemed too old to belong in this year. He stopped in his tracks. Relief surged through him. If she was real, if she was here, then maybe everything else was real too. Maybe this was the hidden truth he had been circling all along. He walked up slowly, cautious, like approaching an animal that might spook you. He whispered, "I thought you were gone." She looked up, her expression softening. "I told you, Michael, you always forget." And then she closed the magazine and handed it to him. His breath caught. On the cover was his own face, not as he was now, but younger, maybe 20. The headline read, "Missing passenger still not found." The date was blurred, smudged, but unmistakably years old. He dropped the magazine as if it burned. His pulse pounded in his ears. "What is this?" "You wanted answers," she said. "This is what you asked for. You were never on that flight, not the way you think." The words struck deep, anchoring him in a false resolution. For a moment, he believed her. He believed he was piecing it together, that his life since that childhood summer had been stitched from missing time, from moments he was never meant to recall. He believed he had uncovered the mystery they never wanted him to uncover. He pressed harder. "Why me? Why do I remember pieces if I wasn't supposed to?" Her eyes flicked over his shoulder, scanning the crowd as if she expected someone to be listening. "Because you were chosen, Michael, because you saw through once before." He almost asked what he had seen, but the weight in her voice, the way she said chosen, filled him with dread too heavy to face head-on. He thought of his father telling him never to go near the basement door, the one painted red, though no one remembered painting it. He thought of hearing whispers through it late at night. He thought of his mother crying in the kitchen afterward, whispering, "You're not crazy, they lied to you." The woman touched his arm. "Do you want me to show you?" He nodded, because what else could he do? She led him down a quiet service corridor of the airport, away from the passengers and security, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. At the end of the hall was an unmarked door. She pulled a key from her pocket. It looked too old, too heavy, brass worn thin from years of use. "This is it," she said. "The truth." Michael's chest seized with a trembling relief. This was it. He was about to step through and finally make sense of everything. His pulse slowed, his thoughts steadied. For once the madness had direction. She unlocked the door. The hinges creaked. The room beyond was dark, cold air pressing against his skin. He stepped inside and froze. It wasn't a room. It was his childhood basement. The red door stood at the far wall, just as he remembered, peeling paint, rust along the knob. A sick familiarity clawed its way up his throat. He turned to the woman, his voice breaking. How can this be here?" But she wasn't there. The door had shut. He was alone. He staggered forward, the smell of damp concrete and dust overwhelming. He reached for the door, the same way he had once reached as a child before his father pulled him back. He touched the knob. It was ice cold. And then, from the other side, came a sound he knew too well, the crying of a baby. His body locked, the noise cutting into him, shaking him to his marrow. He yanked his hand back, heart pounding, breath shallow. The crying grew louder, desperate, until it cracked into a voice, one he hadn't heard in years, one that didn't belong to any child. "Michael," it said, slow and deliberate. "You already opened me." His stomach dropped, his head spun. No, he had never opened the door. He remembered his father stopping him. He remembered the warning. Except the memory twisted, shifted under the weight of that voice. He had opened it, hadn't he? He could see his own small hands turning the knob, pushing against the door. He could smell the air that poured out. He could see the darkness inside. The realization tore through him like a blade. Every missing fragment, every unexplained absence, every memory glitch he had chalked up to trauma wasn't an accident. It was the result of that moment, of something seeping through once the door had cracked. He backed away, gasping, the walls closing in. The crying stopped. Silence swallowed the basement, and then without warning the entire scene shifted. The concrete floor became carpet. The basement walls dissolved into the patterned wallpaper of an airplane cabin. He was back in his seat, the seatbelt cutting across his chest. The passengers around him were laughing, chatting, flipping through magazines. The baby was crying again, but when he turned to the woman beside him, the seat was empty. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Screen lit, one notification, a voicemail, no number, just a timestamp asterisk 12 years ago. Hand shaking, he pressed play, and what came through the speaker was his own voice, older, ragged, whispering through static. "Don't trust the badge, don't trust the woman. It's not them, it's the one watching right now." The message ended, and Michael realized, with sickening clarity, that the story he thought he was piecing together wasn't about the flight, or the crying baby, or even the red door. The hidden truth was simpler, more devastating. The force behind it had been there from the very first memory he ever doubted. Waiting, shaping, making sure every resolution unraveled just as he thought he was safe. And now, listening to his own warning from a future he didn't remember living, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The Watcher had been with him since the beginning. Michael sat in the dim cabin light, the faint hum of the engines vibrating through his bones, and tried to steady his breathing. The voicemail still burned in his mind. His own voice whispering from a time he couldn't remember, warning him of something watching. But before he could think, before he could ask himself what it meant, his phone buzzed again. The screen flashed once, then went black, then lit with a message that wasn't there before. No number, no name. Just 6 words that chilled him deeper than the badge, deeper than the baby's cry, deeper than the red door. "You were right all along, Michael." He froze, staring at the words, the phone trembling in his hand. He didn't dare blink, because how could anyone send a message without a number, without a signal, on a phone that had been dead since takeoff? And yet, the message pulsed in front of him, glowing faintly, as if it wanted him to read it over and over until it rewired his brain. For a moment he thought it was a trick of his mind, a hallucination. But then he noticed the man across the aisle, middle-aged, sharp suit, thick glasses. He was watching Michael's phone screen, not with curiosity, not with confusion, but with a look of grim recognition, like he had been waiting for it. And when their eyes met, the man gave the faintest nod, so small Michael might have imagined it. Michael's chest tightened. It wasn't just him. He wasn't the only one. The thought was both a relief and a terror, because if others knew, if others had seen, then the silence around it meant something worse than madness. It meant coordination, control, a force big enough to make entire rooms forget. Michael looked down at his phone again, but the message was gone, replaced with static across the screen, flickering symbols that almost looked like letters, almost looked like a code. He tried to make sense of them, but the lines bent, reshaped, refused to stay still. Then, faintly, on the reflection of the seatback monitor, he saw it again, written in reverse, as though meant only for him. Found footage from 20 years ago. His stomach dropped. He didn't know why, but he knew what it meant. He remembered the VHS tapes in his father's locked cabinet, the ones he had been forbidden to touch. He remembered sneaking one out when he was 13, playing it on the old basement TV. The footage had been shaky, grainy, showing a group of men in uniforms speaking in hushed voices. The sound had glitched, warped, but he swore he had heard his own name in the recording. His father had ripped the tape from the player, his face pale, his hands shaking, swearing it was nothing, swearing it was garbage. But Michael knew now that wasn't garbage. That was evidence. That was what the government never released. The man across the aisle shifted, leaning slightly toward him. Michael's throat went dry. He knew this was the moment. The man lowered his glasses, just enough to reveal tired, bloodshot eyes. "You remember, don't you?" he whispered. Michael wanted to deny it. He wanted to say no, to bury the memory. But the words caught in his chest. He remembered too well. He remembered the basement. He remembered the tapes. He remembered the red door. And the man's next words nearly stopped his heart. "They've been waiting for you to say it." Michael's grip tightened on the armrest, his knuckles white. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His brain screamed to ask who they were, but the answer was already pressing against him in the thick air of the cabin, in the hum of the engines, in the strange stillness of the passengers who smiled easily. And then another thought wormed its way into his mind, so invasive it didn't feel like his own. What if the passengers weren't real at all? What if the plane wasn't a plane, but a memory replaying itself, over and over, until he broke the cycle? The man across the aisle leaned closer. "We've all seen them," he murmured, "in the mirrors, in the dreams. We just don't admit it out loud." Michael's body tensed. His mind flashed back to the mirror in the airport bathroom, the reflection that didn't move. But more than that, it flashed to a dream he had tried to bury, the dream where he stood in his childhood hallway, staring at himself sleeping in bed. He had dismissed it as a nightmare, but now he realized he hadn't been dreaming at all. He had been remembering. The man pulled something from his pocket. Not a phone, not a wallet. A folded slip of paper, edges frayed, creased from years of being hidden. He slid it across the aisle onto Michael's tray table. Michael hesitated, then unfolded it. There, scrawled in messy ink, was the same phrase. Asterisk, "You were right all along." But beneath it was a symbol, an eye, drawn in rough strokes, split down the center with a line. A symbol Michael knew, not because he had seen it before, but because he had drawn it himself as a child, over and over, on notebooks, on scraps of paper, on the wall of the basement. The weight of it nearly knocked the breath from him. He looked up to confront the man, but the seat across the aisle was empty. No glasses, no suit, no man. And yet the paper remained on his tray table, pulsing faintly as if inked with something alive. The air shifted. He wasn't alone. He never had been. Because from the corner of the cabin, behind the rows of quiet passengers, a voice rose, soft but clear enough to pierce the silence. A woman's voice, familiar. He doesn't remember yet. Michael turned, heart racing, searching for the source. But every face looked forward, calm, smiling. And then it hit him with sickening clarity. The voice hadn't come from the cabin at all. It had come from behind his ear. He staggered, clutching the slip of paper, his breath sharp and shallow. His mind screamed for a line between reality and hallucination, between past and present, between memory and dream. But the line was gone, because now the truth unfolded in a way that was undeniable, in a way that made him realize he wasn't the main character of this story, not anymore. He was only one of many. The cryptic messages, the mirrored glitches, the shared symbols, they weren't isolated. They were a network, threaded through time, pulling in everyone who had ever glimpsed the watcher behind the red door. And Michael wasn't the first. He felt it now. The cabin wasn't a plane, wasn't a terminal, wasn't a basement. It was all of them at once, layered realities pressing against each other like pages of a book flipped too fast. And somewhere within those pages was an observer, someone who had seen everything from the beginning, someone who might be the only one telling the truth. Michael felt his throat tighten. He wanted to speak, to ask, but the words refused. Instead, a single phrase pushed through, not from him, but into him. "You're not crazy. They lied to you." The lights flickered. The paper in his hand burned cold. The passengers turned their heads in unison, their smiles frozen, their eyes locked on him. And in that instant, Michael knew whatever had been watching wasn't watching him anymore. It was watching us. Michael had lost track of how long he had been awake, or if he was even awake at all. The hum of the engines, the flickering lights, the static that bled into his thoughts, they no longer felt external. They felt stitched into him, like veins carrying something older than memory. Every time he blinked, he saw fragments. The badge, the crying, the red door, the mirror that smiled when he didn't. It was all coming together, but not into an answer, into a weight. A truth so heavy it bent everything around it. For days, maybe years, he had been trying to ask the wrong question. He had chased the mystery like it was an equation, something to be solved, something to lock down and file away. But sitting there, hands trembling around the paper marked with a split-eye symbol, he realized it wasn't about what had happened to him. It was about why. And why he knew now was the only question that could break him. He heard his mother's voice again, not in memory, but in the present, soft and tired, whispering through the cabin air. "You're not crazy. They lied to you." And this time, for the first time, he didn't push it away. He let it in. He thought of her silence at the dinner table, her shaking hands when she washed dishes. The way she never looked him in the eye after that night in the basement. He thought of his father's anger, his insistence that the red door had never existed. He thought of the way they had both tried to bury it in him, how their fear had been passed down like inheritance. The weight of it broke him open. His chest heaved, tears rising hot to his eyes. He wasn't just fighting some unseen force. He was fighting the part of himself that had agreed to forget, because forgetting was safer than remembering. He was complicit in his own silence. That was the truth he had run from all along. The cabin flickered again, and in the distortion he saw the others. Not passengers, not strangers, faces he knew. His sister, alive, his father, younger, standing at the basement door. The man with the badge, his features shifting like clay, sometimes his uncle, sometimes a teacher he once trusted, sometimes a stranger. And in every flicker, their eyes fixed on him, waiting, watching, not asking what did you see, but asking something much deeper. What will you allow yourself to believe? He felt the choice in his chest, heavier than gravity. If he chose to believe it was all madness, if he dismissed it as trauma or delusion, he could keep living. He could walk off this plane, convince himself it was a dream, and go on with his life. But if he believed it, if he truly accepted the Watcher, the red door, the buried truth, then everything would unravel. His life, his memories, his identity. He might never come back. The woman's voice returned, closer this time, almost in his ear. It isn't about opening the door, Michael, it's about admitting you already did. His hands shook, the slip of paper damp with sweat. He wanted to scream, to fight, to deny it. But a deeper part of him, the part that had been silent for years, rose like a tide, undeniable. He remembered the moment, his small hands on the knob, the cold air rushing out. He remembered stepping inside. He remembered what had whispered to him in the dark, and he remembered liking it. The confession crushed him. It wasn't just that he had seen something forbidden, it was that some part of him had chosen it, welcomed it. That was the wound that had never healed. That was why the Watcher had never left. The air in the cabin grew heavy, pressing against his lungs. The passengers turned in unison, their smiles breaking, their faces hollowing into masks that were neither alive nor dead. He clutched his chest, sobbing now, every nerve screaming. Why me? He cried, voice cracking. Why did it have to be me? And in the silence that followed, he understood. Not because anyone answered, but because the answer was inside him. It had always been him. He was the door. He was the memory glitch. He was the found footage from 20 years ago. He was the reason others had been pulled into the conspiracy. It wasn't watching him. It was watching through him. The realization tore through him like light. He collapsed back into his seat, eyes shut tight, shaking. And when he opened them, the cabin was gone. He was back in the basement, kneeling before the red door. His hand rested on the knob. His reflection in the metal stared back at him, smiling. He could not tell if opening it again would destroy him or set him free. He only knew this. Whatever lay beyond was not waiting anymore. It was already here. And in that moment he felt it, the raw terror of awakening not from a dream, but into one. The screen flickered, the sound cut, and the last thing the audience saw was Michael's lips moving, forming words they could not hear, a confession lost to static. And then the voice, calm, human, almost kind. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for stories you were never meant to hear. Until next time, remember, some truths don't want to be found.